The new Dodge Challenger with its 6.1 Hemi is a proud warrior in the new Detroit muscle car wars. Yeah, just like in the late 60s and early 70s, the big three are battling it out for pony car prominence. Well, today, for the first time ever on TV, our strategy is to arm this pony car with an innovative, potent supercharger. Yeah, that's the man behind it, Edelbrock. And believe me, what he's brought in today raises the bar in the history of Hemi performance. The battlefield was quite different during the first muscle car wars, and these pony cars, Mustang and Camaro, were the frontline factory street fighters. Then, in 1970, Mopar joined the fray with this sleek, powerful Dodge Challenger RT. It had 4 big block engine options, but only 355 RTs were sold with Hemis. For pure nostalgia, you can't beat the originals. But when it comes to acceleration, braking, cornering, comfort, even fuel economy, well, they've been severely outgunned by their new age successors. Well, here's that trick new supercharger I was telling you about. It's the Edelbrock E-Force for 2005 through 2010 6.1 liter Hemis, including the Challenger. We'll tell you more about that in a minute. Now, it's a complete kit with everything you'll need to bolt it up under your hood the day it comes to the house. Well, I could tell you more, but you'd probably rather hear that from the man whose name is on it, Edelbrock.
There's nothing like this on the market the way this has been done, and I'm super proud of that and the fact that everything is made in USA. And Eaton has made us a supercharger kit here. It's the same one that's in the ZR1. It's called the Gen 6. It's going to mean more power, be more efficient, better mileage, the whole 9 yards.
Here's an inside look at the Eaton TVS 4-lobe assembly design. It has a full 160 degrees of twist for maximum flow and minimum temperature rise. Edelbrock's inverted intake manifold design keeps the supercharger quiet and allows for a long, smooth runner path. There's also an integrated bypass valve, which is all about better mileage. You see, it stays open under light throttle to keep the fuel use the same as it would be without the supercharger.
Even though there are 147 steps in the instruction manual, there's really not that much work to do. In fact, 14 of those steps involve getting the front fascia off. And don't just let it sit on the shop floor. Lay it down on something like a blanket to protect the paint. With the 4 bolts removed from the AC condenser, we can let it hang. Now you want to reuse the coolant, so put it in a spotless drain pan and save it. Now we can remove the radiator hoses and the 4 bolts that support the radiator saddle and lower it, the radiator, and fan assembly from the bottom of the car. To remove the factory belt and put it aside for later reuse. The damper is a press fit. The extra stress from the blower could make it slip, so we have to add a keyway. Using the supplied fixture, making sure it's rotated so you have access to the pilot hole. Drill through the guide into the crank until the tape mark hits the guide. Now we can spin the guide and use the supplied reamer to ream the hole. Next, apply a dab of green Loctite to the supplied crank pin and insert it into the hole in the crank. Now with a little grease applied to the new balancer, install it and torque it down. Finally, the supercharger pulley can be bolted to the balancer and torqued to 18 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Next, we disconnect the intake air temp sensor and remove the air inlet tube along with the air box. Remove the studs and bolts at the top of the water pump. Then the idler pulley comes off, but save it for later too. Use a removal tool to disconnect the passenger side fuel line. After removing all the intake bolts, the intake manifold can come off. Now clean the cylinder head flanges and tape the ports to keep any debris out. The teardown, it wasn't that bad at all. Now the only special tool we needed was this right here, and it was to install a new damper because the threads are so deep in the crankshaft. Now check this out, we're already at step 54 out of 147. So needless to say, if the cameras weren't around, we would have had all this work done in about 2 hours. Now let's see how the rest of the components and that big supercharger fit on this 6.1 Hemi.
Last year, just after the E-Force was introduced for Corvettes, Mustangs, and F-150 trucks, we paid a visit to Edelbrock's California headquarters. Hey, talk about quality control. They've got their own foundry for the complex supercharger manifold casting, along with their own heat treating system. After the manifold is powder coated, It takes a Makino A88 2.5 hours with 47 tool changes to machine it. Then, after a strict detailed QC drill, it's all hand assembled, including the Eaton Gen 6 rotors. Then it's pressure tested before it's fitted with a self-contained oiling system that won't need refilling for 100,000 miles. Then that bypass valve we showed you gets installed. Of course, they constantly test them on their dynos, but there's nothing like the ultimate test out on the pavement.
Well, now that you know how it's made, let's see how it all goes on. Now, it may look like there's a lot left on the table, but really, it's just some big parts left, and they're going to disappear fast, starting with some brackets and pulleys. With the factory serpentine belt laid back in its stock location, we need to loosely bolt the idler pulley behind the supply tensioner bracket. Then add 2 new idler pulleys and a supplied serpentine belt tensioner, and secure the top of the bracket, where we loosely position the nose support blocks for the supercharger.
The next thing is to remove the factory intake manifold gaskets. To avoid tearing the rubber inserts out of the gaskets, spray on a little WD-40 and lay the gaskets in place. Now this is definitely a 2-man job, carefully dropping the supercharger in place and lining it up.
Come your way just a hair.
Please do.
Man, this thing looks killer in here.
And it does. It's just got just enough room.
Fits perfect.
Not a lot of space in there, and every car is a little different. It's all got to be made from the ground up for the particular application that it is.
Do the aesthetics have anything to do with you?
Well, I definitely. I think people like to raise their hood and go, oh my God. And that's one thing that I do quite often when I drive my cars around. I lift the hood up and the people look in there and they just can't believe what they're seeing. So we want to make it look good, and we want to put that extra touch in there so that the person is really proud and enjoy the performance and everything else that goes with it.
Now with the new injectors installed in the fuel rails, we can apply lube to the O-rings and push them into the manifold. Next, secure them to the supercharger. Now we can route the crossover hose from the rear passenger side rail fitting to the rear driver side rail fitting and connect the fuel supply line to the front passenger side rail. Here's where these nose support blocks come into play. We push and tighten each against the blower snout to keep it from being pulled down by the belt tension. Next, we connect the evap hose to the air inlet and install a new PCV valve. At this point, we'll go ahead and install the supercharger drive belt.
With more plastic off the front, the water pump for the intercooler goes behind the bumper.
After removing the fan assembly from the radiator, John's rotating the passenger side motor housing so the connector faces upward. Then he trims the shroud enough to clear the new harness connector location. Okay, now the fans and radiator can be installed in their original location as far forward as possible. Then the kit's low-tip heat exchanger mounts in front of the AC condenser, and a hose runs from the bottom of it to the intercooler. Another hose connects the heat exchanger to the pump. The intercooler uses a reservoir that mounts onto the 2 inboard strut tower studs. This hose connects the reservoir to the pump. Another connects the intercooler to the reservoir, completing the loop. Then we're unbolting the stock throttle body and installing it onto the supercharger.
Great job, you guys.
And finally, the last part of the kit is this less restrictive, high-flow cold air intake.
Air coming through and going into an engine like this under pressure is it's like liquid, and you keep it as stable as you can. The more you keep it stable, the more you're going to get in the engine, and the better the performance. And what Eaton did with that supercharger was really work on that. The thing on this is the fact that everything goes under the hood with no scoop, or it's a sleeper, you know, and nobody knows you got it until you press the throttle and away you go.
It looks factory, that's for sure.
Just how much go, we're about to find out on the dyno. Well, you saw how this modern muscle supercharger was made. You got an inside look at some of its design innovation. We showed you how relatively simple it installs. Now let's finish up the E-Force and see if the force is with us on the dyno. Wiring for the kit's pretty simple. Basically, there's a positive connection, a negative to the strut tower, and this clip to power the pump. We're also giving the Challenger an oil change with Edelbrock's new full synthetic cat-safe formula, specially made for high-performance engines. Then we can replace the coolant we drained earlier, add new 50/50 to the intercooler, and drop on the cool-looking coil covers. Well, it's time to let this program module do its thing, and the beauty of this one is it comes calibrated for your car. There's no sending off ECUs for flashing and such. It does have options for things like different tire sizes and gear ratios, but hey, we're all stock. This will take no time. And it's stock for a reason. This is a daily driver for the owner who buys gas at the same place as we do.
I ran my Z06 with a supercharger on it, the Power Tour, 1,500 miles, 26.3 miles per gallon. So that's pretty good. And maybe that's what you got stock, but it's the fact that you now have another 160, 70 horsepower in there, and you can run the same mileage that you ran before.
Last year, we did a stock baseline run on an identical 6-speed 6.1 Hemi Challenger,
Here we go.
and the rear wheel numbers were 365 horsepower and 367 foot-pounds of torque. With the E-Force,
470 horsepower.
All right,
You happy with that? That's almost 100, man.
All right with it, yeah.
But it's more than just horsepower. Check out the graph.
From our baseline to our supercharger run, we made 102 foot-pounds of torque, and it carried that all the way through the RPM range.
And that's the real important part, and that's why we've got that runner length in there to carry this torque out and make a flat curve like that, because that's what you feel in what we call seat of the pants performance, is moving that car, and this is what does it right there. Very, very happy with that.
Keeps your head planted on the headrest.
There you go.
so this Challenger gets the seal of approval.
We're extremely proud of this project.
And the owner had a special request from Vic.
One of the most exciting things that's hit our company in a very long time. So we're going to ride that wave and go a long way with it.
You're watching Horsepower. For a DVD copy of this episode, just go to PowerBlockTV.com and order your copy for just $5.95 plus shipping and handling. Start your own Horsepower collection, delivered right to your door from the Power Block.
Welcome back to Horsepower. The concept of piston engines has been around for over a century. It uses one or more reciprocating pistons, converting pressure into rotating motion to make horsepower. Now, with all the different types of engines we have running out there today, we have several different variations of pistons that we need to discuss before we do our engine build. Now, today we're going to go over the major types of pistons and show you how to remove and replace a set. Now, when working with an everyday street engine, a cast piston is going to be your best bet. Now, they're budget friendly and they have acceptable strength and longevity, but they need loose tolerances in the cylinder bore because of the expansion rate they have. Now, these tolerances can create a few issues. One is piston slap, another one is scuffing, and manufacturers have even found that on a cast piston, when it's cold, will actually have a little bit of fuel left in the ringlands, causing issues with emissions and fuel economy. Now, a better choice to go with would be maybe a hyper-eutectic piston. Now, there's a couple of reasons. They're stronger than a cast piston. They're good for hot street engines up to mild racing. Now, they have a unique feature about them. They actually are cast with an aluminum alloy with a silicone content. Now, what that does is make a lower thermal expansion rate and allows engine builders to run tighter tolerances. Now, this helps reduce piston slap and scuffing on cold startups, as well as better fuel economy and emissions. Now, forged pistons are preferred for more of a full-on race-type engine. Blowers, turbos, and nitrous engines all call for a forged piston because of the intense cylinder pressure that they create. Now, the difference between cast and forged pistons is simple. A cast piston is metal that's melted all the way down to a liquid state, poured into a mold, and that's how you get the cast. Now, a forged piston is a little different. It's not melted completely all the way down. They heat it up to a semi-solid state, put it into a die where a press comes in and puts it under extreme pressure to create the mold that they want. The result is a lighter, stronger piston that definitely costs more. Now, if this is the first time that you're replacing or upgrading a set of pistons, there's a few basic engine building rules that you must follow. First, mark your rods so each will go back where they came from. Also, note the orientation of the piston to the rod when you remove them from the block. Pistons and rods have a direction that they face. Now, these are a press fit piston, and while you'll probably have a machine shop handle this, we're using our Goodson tool to press out the pins that connect the rods to the pistons. And by the way, if you're reusing the rods, give them a little love in the blast cabinet and they'll come out looking brand new. Goodson also makes a rod heater that uses propane and compressed air to heat and swell the small end of the rod. We're using a Goodson fixture that holds the new piston in place while we install the pin with the rod. In addition, it has a stop to make sure that the pin locates in the middle of the rod. If it touches the cylinder wall, it will cause damage. Now, the heated small ends of the rod allow the pin to slip through easily, and after cooling, you're ready for reassembly. Now, we've all heard the horror stories of running hyper-eutectic pistons in engines. Now, here's what's going on. Now, because of the tighter cylinder bore clearance, the same size ring actually has less room to expand. If those two ring gaps touch, it's going to cut the top of the piston right in half. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to correct that while you're assembling the motor. Now, you have some choices with your rings. You can get file fit or pre-fit ones. But either way, you need to go ahead and add about an extra thousandths clearance per inch of bore to ensure you have enough end gap depending on your project. So bottom line, if you don't plan well, it won't build well. Just like Mama said, do your homework.
If you want your engine to have a visual impact that's also functional, Visual Impact Performance Systems has what you need. This is their TurboTrack serpentine system for LS engines. It comes with a 105 amp alternator, a crank pulley, power steering pump, water pump, and mini stand-in AC compressor, plus all the brackets, bolts, gaskets, and belt you need to install it. Now, they use all Tough Stuff accessories that are polished, so you know this stuff's gonna last. And if you don't have an LS, no worries. They make stuff for Chevy, small block and big block, Chrysler, Fords. Basically, if you have an accessory you need to turn, they've got what you need. Now, we've got another horsepower project ready, but that's gonna have to wait till next time. We'll see you then.